I think it's inevitable when you do this much stuff and then you ask so much of the car that you are going to have some failures. I've certainly had my fair share of them. My name's Heath Van Der Waerden and this is my Street Machine of the Year winning UC Shitbird come LX Torana hatchback. Toranas have always had a good spot in my heart. So when I was 14, I bought my first car, which was an LX 4-door Torana. I had to push my mum pretty hard to let me take on an old car project at that age. I had no priors for that kind of thing, and I finally got there. So I did a light resto on that thing, and it was my P-plate rocket. And I always wanted a hatchback. So I always had a hatchback in my sights. I didn't think that would necessarily be the best P-plate car for driving my friends around and stuff like that, but long term I wanted a V8 manual hatchback Torana. I love the hutch, where you can camp in the back and sleep in them, and that was a big selling point for me. I just love that, the kind of quirky marketing that they did for that and whatnot. So I always had my eyes on it, and I started off with this one. So I bought this in 2013 approximately, maybe 2012, 2013. It was a UC Sunbird originally. It had a bit of a resto and it had been swapped to have a red 202 motor. So it didn't have the Starfire when I bought it, but it's plated as a Sunbird. So my mates call it the Shitbird, which is, can't do much about that. So I drove it around for a little while as a UC. It actually had nice paint and stuff when I bought it, but I always had an image of what it was going to be in my head. So I ultimately, in December 2014, I pulled it off the road when I got some factory space, cut the front off, cut the back off, cut half the floor out, the false floor in the back and the boot floor, trans tunnel, a lot of the suspension areas and the tub areas. And I started basically scratch making areas that would look better, or taking parts off LX models and making it look like it was originally an LX. The dash frame, of course, had to be cut out and replaced. And it doesn't really bear any resemblance to a UC anymore. So I don't mind UCs, but that wasn't what I had in mind for this project at all. I wanted it to be a flared, really traditional kind of 80s style flared hatchback, and that's what I've gradually been able to create. Aesthetic outcome, I guess I was seeking with the car, is to put Japanese style fitment and stance almost on an Aussie car that had flares. That was really the look that I wanted. So I definitely was very focused on having a lot of dish, a bit of camber all around, a bit of tyre stretch, and a kind of intermediate diameter wheel. I didn't want to have a giant billet wheel. I didn't want to be limited to 15-inch wheels where I couldn't have the brakes that I wanted either. So I've gone for a 16-inch front and 17-inch combo, and I've wanted a really loud looking car, which is achieved with the colours mostly. I wanted a targa top originally. I actually wanted to cut through the turret and make like a handmade targa top. Not an easy thing to do. I couldn't really figure out the door frame thing, like how that was going to work. So I ended up settling for a giant sunroof. So I made that with Peter Tomasini over one summer, and that's an aluminium, big, basically 1 metre wide, 600 millimeters long, pop and remove type sunroof. So that was my concession for having a targa top. Couldn't quite get that, and it would have been an engineering nightmare as well. When I was first building the car, I was actually going to have a full cage as well, so that would have tied everything together. And over the progression of the build, I guess it did scale back a bit in its seriousness. It became probably better finished than what I was seeking, and a lot more custom parts than I was thinking. But as far as its radicalness and its kind of engineering in-your-faceness, it's probably dialed back a bit. It doesn't have a bright orange roll cage, which was what I was originally planning on doing, for example. So dynamically, it's very important to me to get the car handling really nicely. The front end of the car is still the double A-arm type suspension. It's just tuned, it's moved forward a bit. I've changed some geometries. I've put hub stiffeners on the stub axles and things like that to make everything, you know, more happy at the high loading that I give it. It's got, you know, solid mounted to the chassis where originally they were rubber mounted, for example, and it's got more camber, more caster, and yeah, extended the wheelbase a little bit, sped up the steering a little bit, just kind of modest improvements, just incremental things like that. And I always wanted to make it at least that good, and you know, if I would have improved the car more in the future, maybe that's an area I'd look at to take things further. I don't exactly know what the next step would be there. With the rear end, the standard Torana is not very good. It's got the triangulated upper arms on the diff, and it puts the roll centre very high. It allows the roll centre to move around when you get lateral loading in the diff. So the harder you push it through a corner, the more the roll centre moves away from where it's supposed to be. So it's not a very predictable way to have a car driving on the limit. So I've put a ball joint on the diff and made a fixed wishbone as the upper link, and I've made adjustable parallel lower arms and just out of chrome moly, and that seems to work quite well without encroaching on the rear passenger area. For example, when I was first thinking of building this car, it was just going to be a two-seater with a full cage. Now it's a, you know, you can have 5 people in there if you want. So it's become more of a road car than maybe the original concept was. The biggest challenge probably during the build was getting the fiberglass panels to fit as well as they fit. They're not that perfect, but they were so far out to begin with that it was really, really difficult to imagine that I could have gotten anywhere. Bodywork is not really my forte, so that was probably the hardest thing for me and the least motivating part of the build. When it comes to the metal fabrication and stuff like that, I enjoy that creativity, I enjoy building my skills there, so even though a lot of that was very difficult, I found that enjoyable and difficult through the challenge. The hardest bit since getting the car on the road is the oiling system. The oiling system, as I built it the first time, would have been fine for driving it round aggressively on the street, but the moment you're actually at 10/10ths going through corners and elevated RPM, like sustained elevated RPM where the top end of the motor is getting full of oil, the control system for it is so weak in the Holden V8 that I had to modify the shit out of that. And I didn't know that up front. I'd heard people say this and that, but I didn't really have a good concept of how all those systems worked. And over time, I've had to have like several iterations to try and improve it. And people always say, oh, have you got that licked now? Have you fixed the oil surge? Well, I need to do the fix and then I need to take it to a track again. So it's quite coarse increments of being able to test it and verify your work. And because it's all happening behind closed doors, you can't see what's happening in the sump when you're driving your car on a racetrack. It's kind of hard to conceptualize what's actually going on and what you might have to build into it or add to it that is missing. It's hard to know. So that's been quite difficult. I think it's inevitable when you do this much stuff and then you ask so much of the car that you are going to have some failures. I've certainly had my fair share of them. So the oiling system's been a bit of a bastard of a failure, really, because it's cost me about 10 grand the other week rebuilding the motor. I would have rather not had that expense, I can assure you. One of the things that I didn't predict when I built my rear suspension system, I built all those parts nice and tough, but I didn't really consider that the factory sheet metal that I was attaching it to was not going to be up to the task of supporting the load. So even though the car weighs less than a standard one, it was only years after I did all that work that I found out that Brockie's A9X had to have reinforcements through all this different area that I had no idea about. They used to just distort all the upper arm mounts and stuff. Well, I've had that same problem on mine. So I've got a nice painted floor that I put a lot of effort in, and I did put reinforcements between the different parts, but the actual individual mounts are not made thick enough to deal with the loading that this car can generate through cornering. So straight line work, you could do it all day long, no problem. But the moment you're on a track with warm, you know, racy rubber, it's just ripping the metalwork apart. So I've done some revisions to that to make it stronger, and I have more in mind, more to do. But they're annoying to do because it's a painted car, it's got trim glued to the floor and everything. So you want to change that stuff, you got to break an omelette, break a few eggs. Sorry, you got to break a few eggs. Oh, I fucked that up. So I've had a few cars in my time, and I've had cars that are great on the track. This is the first car that I've made that's fast. So my experience so far is that having a car that's good on the track is not too hard to achieve if it's a normal speed car. Having a car that's fast is not that hard to make either. Making something that's fast and durable for kind of normal road use, not too hard, but to make a car that's quite fast and then go and do track work with that performance, that's been a really, really hard thing. So just the heat that is generated and the everything that comes with it, just the actual speed that you get to on the straights and stuff like that, there's just a lot going on and a lot of hard stuff when it's all handmade. So my desire is to make it more durable in that environment. So what it can do outright is fantastic. I'm really happy with the performance of it and stuff, but for that to be able to do that sustainably without hurting itself, that's still something I'm working towards. So I've been taking it to Optima Street Car, I've done some hill climbs and some circuit racing kind of sprint work, and the car is so thrilling to drive, but I need to make it so that it can do that without hurting itself. So a bit more strength in certain things. I need to get that oiling system licked, and other than that, I just want to keep on driving it. It has done 30,000 Ks, so I think it's proved itself as a road car, but to prove itself as a durable thrasher with the performance that it has, that's really what the next difficult thing is.